Are you here? Hey, it's the Paul Leslie Hour. Get ready for a treat. Gino Vannelli, the soulful legend, returns to the Paul Leslie Hour for episode number 1070. Gino's first appearance since way back in episode number 143. So, buckle up.
Today we are welcoming a living legend in music, an award-winning recording artist spanning 6 decades. His new release, The Life I Got, to my most beloved. It's my pleasure to present singer-songwriter, musician, poet, author, and performer, Gino Vannelli. Thank you so much for making time to talk to me.
My pleasure, Paul.
So this is not our first time talking. It's been many years now, but we did an interview. It's hard to believe. I want to say it was something like 15, 16 years ago.
I don't remember. Please jog my memory.
There's been a lot of roads since then, so to speak. You've released a lot of albums now.
23.
23. That's really remarkable.
If they're good.
Well, you have maintained quite a high level of both songwriting and production.
Yeah, for me, the long hours in the studio, the long hours of research before we hit the studio, I have ideas and ideas piled on stacks of ideas, in other words. And then I choose between maybe among the 100, maybe I'll choose 15 or 20 to really hone in and carve and sand. And out of those 15, 20, I'll be satisfied with 10 to 12, not because the others aren't not good, but because the 10 or 12 seem to follow a concept that the album deserves. And in this case, The Life I Got, because of my wife's sickness and her eventual death, it really is her album. And I started writing it about 4 years ago when she got cancer, and the downhill trend began then. And of course, I was always hoping for the best, but afraid of losing her. She had been the love of my life since she was just turned 20 when I met her, and I was 22. And so, we lived a life together, and she was the most precious, beautiful thing in my life. And so all I could do was write about it. Of course, I could comfort her and take care of her the best I could, especially during the last 2 years. But my only way out, my only catharsis was to sit down and try to exact my feelings, to be precise with my feelings, so that not only could I read it and know that they were true, but the audience could sense their truth, and that most importantly, that Trisha could hear it and know that I was speaking the truth. So there was an extra kind of pressure to make each line, each word, the exact sentiment that I felt.
I'm very sorry for your loss. Gino, was there any part of you that wanted to keep these thoughts, these emotions, what became these songs? Was there any part of you that wanted to keep that to yourself?
Yes, I mean, of course. But, I'm so used to collecting thoughts and then scrambling them inside, putting them in the cement mixer, if you will, and then putting out something that is my thought process, my sentimental process. And in this case, I felt no different that because it was such strong emotions. I started thinking that at one point, well, of course, I'm not alone, and Trisha's not alone. There are many people going through this. And so I just felt like it was, as painful as it was time to share.
What do you want people to know about this person, Trisha, who you shared a life with, who inspired you, and is the dedication from this album?
Well, I'll kind of start at the beginning. I met Trisha in Portland, Oregon, 1974. Like I said, she just had turned 20 a month prior to my meeting her. And she was placing jewelry in a jewelry store, and we had a canceled concert, I should say, because of a snowstorm. And I was walking around, trudging in the snow, and I saw this vision, placing jewelry in a jewelry store storefront window. And she looked up, and I looked at her, and I was sort of struck by lightning. And I went in and I fumbled, and I tried to ask her out for a coffee or something like that. And of course she said no. But at the end, I decided to buy something. I think I pretended to buy earrings for my mother. And when she gave me the change, she slipped her number finally with the change. And I called her and we got together that night and we decided that we felt this attraction. I was recording Storm at Sunup at the time and had a little bungalow in West Hollywood. And so she came. She kind of tried me out for size. She said she kicked the tires. So, she came down. And so she came down maybe 2 or 3 months later. And we felt that was it, that we were meant for each other. And of course, when you're that age, you're going to go through ups and downs and all that. But it was the kind of love that the more I knew her, the more I loved her. We shared so much of the same values and same thoughts. And she was just, simply stunningly beautiful. So you couldn't take your eyes off her, as well as, want to speak to her and realize there was a brain, behind that beauty. And so that combination just was, for me, there was nothing to compete with, And so it lasted for 49 years. And I loved her, I think, twice as much the day before she passed. Then I loved her as much as I loved her when I just met her. I actually had a concert in North Carolina, Charlotte, and I came home and she said she was okay. And the next morning she was gone. So she waited for me.
So she was able to hear this record. Is that correct?
Most of it, yes. I believe all of it, but maybe I changed a couple lines in Stormy River at the end, right before her passing, and I didn't want to show her the lines that I changed.
Do you see your albums as kind of autobiographical documentations in a sense?
Partly. And I will sometimes take what is a personal experience and extrapolate upon it. Like, for instance, on the Wilderness Road record, I was intrigued by the story of Adam Walsh, the son of John Walsh. And it was the reason why John Walsh started working for the FBI or helped them create a most wanted list nationally, because his son was kidnapped and they found him days or weeks later. And his head had been severed, and it's just a horror story. And so I read about the story, and it really struck me so that I started thinking about all the spiritual aspects of it. Why would someone want to do that to a child? And is there justice? Months later, they found the person they thought, at least were pretty certain, was the perpetrator, but it was 30 years later, actually. Not months later, but months later after I thought about this. And they figured he was the one, and he had died a miserable death in a fire. And I started thinking that it's probably not our deeds so much that catch up to us, but it's our natures, because our natures will keep creating the same scenario over and over again. And that scenario will eventually, it's kind of like the bully who's a bully until he meets a bigger bully. It's not so much the bullying, this one person or that second person that got him into trouble. It's his nature of being a bully that eventually the cards, were stacked up not in his favor. And so I figured that's what I wanted to write about. So there's a very good case in point of taking in a real life experience, someone else's, of course, but really internalizing it and then coming up with something that I feel as a personal opinion worth stating. And then the challenge becomes writing it in poetry form and song form and what music to give it. Most songs, I go through that process. And that's why it takes me time, because I just don't like writing songs for songs. In fact, I can't do it anymore after all these years. I need to really be motivated by something that I can really sink my teeth into and sit for hours, and the hours seem to pass by like minutes.
That Wilderness Road album, my feelings about it.
Yeah.
It's just such an incredible album. And as much as there are these elements of incredible beauty, I did not know this about this part of the inspiration, that very horrifying story. I had no idea, but there is a darkness there in that album.
There is absolutely a darkness in that album. I mean, I knew someone who wanted to commit suicide, and I always thought that the way to help someone who wants to self-immolate is always never to talk about too big a stroke, too long a stroke, too broad a stroke psychology. They'll just deny it and they'll just refute it. But if you just sort of say something that gives them another hour, maybe another day, or at least a night, they will feel different in the morning. most people, I read this a few times, that there are a couple of people that survived the jump off a Golden Gate, and they were asked what was going through your head right before you hit the water. And the ones that survived said, basically, I made a mistake. And so I wanted to write about that. And that's one of the tunes. The road to redemption is, the years that you wish you could have been better. And that in my youth, I was still, given to chaos a little bit. That's because I just was a volcano spewing lava, all the time, trying to find a direction to my energy. And I wish I could have been better to Trish, in those early years. And I needed to write about it. And there's a lot of songs like that on that album. Wilderness Road is very autobiographical itself.
Well, you just mentioned your younger days. How do you see your art now, as opposed to when you first were embarking on this sojourn?
Well, when you're 21, well, I started when I was 16. I was signed to RCA Victor in Canada when I was fresh out of high school at 17 years old. And then I moved to New York when I was 18. I lived there for about a year and a half. And then I moved to Los Angeles when I was 20. And I finally got the record deal, with A&M Records. And I recorded all those records during the 70s. I was a kind of stop-at-nothing kind of guy. And yet at war with myself in many ways, because I was truly a shy, sensitive person. But I was doggedly determined to get my point across and to be an artist and a singer and a writer. And that is the spiritual aspect to it, is the unknown aspect, the impulse that you don't know where it's coming from. And as you follow your impulses, doors seem to creak open, and that leads you to believe that you're on the right path. And that I've always felt that I was on that spiritual path because the right doors seem to open at the right time. And then sometimes I go through a long period, a 3-4 year period, where none of the doors opened. It just was a slog all the way. But then in later years, looking back, I realized that I was banging on the wrong doors. I had to really reinvent myself, reprocess my thought process, go back to my roots, my Catholic roots, only to realize that they were unuseful to me anymore, that I had really gone really past them, so that I needed to go into much deeper history of the process of going inward. And that supplicant or supplications to what we would call God was just not good enough. It's almost like, you're nothing but a beggar begging for scraps. You have to find yourself. And that process of finding or refinding yourself is a very, very long, deep, and hard road. And I took it, and I wanted to take it. So I took 7 years of theology and studied the humanities. And I actually practiced many disciplines, including Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, a little bit of Theravada, then studied the Kabbalah, then studied mystic Christianity, Rosicrucianism, even Scientology for a little spell. So I really wanted to understand, not so much dabbling cafeteria style, but wanted to understand why this really smart person became a Scientologist, or why this really smart person now was into chanting. What does it give you to chant? Why another really smart person becomes a student of the Kabbalah for 26 years. And then as the person was dying, threw it all away and said to me, I know nothing. And so those are pivotal moments in my in the life, but really on the path of trying to understand how I could be the best that I could be in my own way, make better art, mirror myself, mirror my feelings better, become a better singer. All those things. So to me, that's why music has been so important and so sacred, because it's really tied to a lifelong wish of mastery. Mastering certain parts of music, you feel like you master yourself, because it really takes a certain discipline to finish this thing and finish it well.
It occurs to me as you're saying this, so much of this is an inward quest, mastery of not just an artist, but becoming the best person you can be. But at the same time, there's a commercial element. You've got to be someone who puts people in the seats. So how have you been able to have that dance kind of being an artist and also being commercial, also being, for lack of a better word, a product?
Well, I'll have to say it this way. Let's just take Gautama the Buddha. The story is that after he's enlightened under the Bodhi tree or the banyan tree, he sees life really for what it is, and he's no longer at the mercy of the wheel of life. But then he has this little voice. Some say it's God, some say it's whatever it is, that tells him you have to share this knowledge. So what does he do? He becomes a salesman, basically. He has to deal with the commercial aspect of himself. I found an ultimate truth in life that this causes suffering, this causes pain, and the Buddhist tenets. At the same time, he was out there trying to convince people. So what am I trying to do as an artist? I'm just trying to convince people to hear me. You say sitting in the seats. It's just another way of saying, come hear me and put a few bucks in a plate. He had to do the same thing. And so did Christ. I mean, even Jesus was selling something. He was selling his heart. He was selling what he believed in, because he really felt it was good for people. But nonetheless, he's selling something, and some people didn't want to buy. And we had to find a way to keep alive. Jesus himself had to deal with commerce. They had to eat. They had to travel. They were with him and Mary Magdalene and the 12. There were 14 people on the road. Someone had to feed them. So he had to be at least aware of the commerce or the commercial part of it. So for me, yes, I had to be very aware of the commercial aspect of it because I wanted to keep on making records. So I realized that I have to sell records to keep on making records. And how far would I go? That becomes the question. And when I was asked to do certain songs by a fellow named Clive Davis at Arista and all that, I saw where my limit was. Where I wouldn't go. And I paid heavily for it, but so be it.
You don't regret it?
Not at all. No, I would have really regretted doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Is inspiration something that you seek? Are you trying to find inspiration? Or are you...
Most of the time, I'm kind of an open wound, especially since Trisha's passing. But for years and years and years, I mean, I would always be paying attention to people. Like, for instance, on the Wilderness Road album, Yet Something Beautiful. I'll walk into a cafe named Celebrate Me Home with my two boys, my two Aussies, and we sit down and we usually have lunch there. And the lady, Mary, is very, very accommodating, and she allowed my dogs to come in and sit with me. They're very quiet, well-behaved. And suddenly a woman wheels a man into the cafe at lunchtime. It's full, and he's obviously had a stroke or Parkinson or something that has created this great debilitation and allowed and disturbing debilitation where he grunts and yells out, randomly. And a lot of the people were put off, including my dogs, wondering what was going on with this person. And so you can't help but turn your head. And then as I turned my head the second and third time, I saw how patient she was. She must have been his wife for a long time. And I saw how she spoke to him as if he was the man she always knew. And I started thinking of, that's 24/7. She's dealing with that, and she's caring for him, caregiving. And I said to myself, now that is an unsung hero. And I studied her. I studied the way she spoke, her timbre, her evenness of speech, even when he threw a few things and grunted loudly. And she'd just say, oh, it's not something you want? Okay, we'll change it. And she never raised her voice, never admonished him, because she knew deep inside he couldn't help it, and that there was some guy caught in this chaos of his body and nervous system that was just all over the place. But inside, he didn't want to be that way, and he wasn't that way. And so I said to myself, I will write about this strange incident that I witnessed. And it really will be focused on this woman and what she's able to do. So it was painting the picture and then coming to the point and just saying, yet something beautiful when love is there. Life is cruel, there's no denying. At times a cross, something too heavy to bear, and yet something beautiful when love is there. And that's what the conclusion of the song is, after describing the scene, him in a wheelchair, so on and so forth. So that inspiration is there because if your eyes are open, you will be constantly inspired by life, because there's so much is happening all the time.
That is just a remarkable song. I think it's a perfect time to ask this. Gino, what do you admire the most in another person?
I think quiet confidence is one trait that I admire. Someone who's able to withhold, to stream their self-esteem so that it becomes very palatable to the person next to them. I love people who think highly of themselves, but yet speak in a self-deprecating way to make the other person feel at ease because it shows thoughtfulness and mindfulness. But you can tell that they're really smart and they have terrific self-esteem, but they just don't flaunt it. That's a trait that I really, really like. I like someone who's deeply involved in the quest for God, the quest to understand where we come from, where we go to, the quest to understand themselves. The famous saying of know thyself. Know thyself doesn't only mean read a lot of books. Know thyself is to understand yourself. Why do I do these things? And how should I act? Or how could I be better? And self-examination. Someone who's not afraid to self-examine and self-correct. That's a trait I admire greatly. And I also admire people who have great physical beauty, who underplay their beauty and do not act like they're bucking for a compliment, but again, act as if they're not trying to make people feel uncomfortable. They're mindful of other people's feelings. My wife was that way. She was an extraordinarily beautiful woman. And until cancer really got her, I mean, when she acquired the cancer, she was 65. And until then, she was just, people that were 30 years old were kept hitting on her, and I used to laugh and she used to laugh. But she had this way about her that never walked into a room and said, well, I'm hot, She just walked into a room and the room almost was like filled with flowers and a bouquet of flowers because she walked in.
Wow. So many of the things that you admire in a person, that you appreciate about a person, are, you've put it so well. It's exactly.
Yeah, we all appreciate great art. We appreciate great artists. I love meeting artists that are really good artists that are not too humble, because that's off-putting. But again, just a streak, a pinch of pride is enough. Let the other person discover who you are and what you've done. I've met some of those people, and they're a great joy to be around. Because you can really talk about music without feeling you're infringing upon either a tattered or a thin-skinned ego or anything like that. I touch upon that in Stardust in the Sand, the book I wrote. I think I go through maybe 12 to 15 artists that I met in person. Some of them are really awkward meetings, but some of them really were very, very joyful because I was very pleased and surprised how open and forthright many of them were.
Well, can you maybe tell us about one that was the most surprising?
Well, Tony Bennett, was pretty humble, but more than humble, it just had a exuberance about him, joyful. And he made me feel like I was too much of a brooder. So I got a real good lesson from him. I had a habit of brooding because it was the way I would kind of go inward to write. And I realize he's not a writer, a composer, and composers tend to do that because as you go inward, you tend to brood a little bit. But he kind of showed me that, there's another way to do it because it was so joyful and so outward and so, he had great equanimity about him. And so in just speaking to him for 10, 15 minutes, I said, here's one of the biggest stars in the world, been doing it for all, 50, 60, 70 years. And he's just at ease with it. And it was a great teaching moment, I would say, for me. So I walked away from saying, I don't have to really take on that kind of, Albert Camus, like the world is falling apart all the time. I could see through the eyes of joy a little bit more.
Well, being that you were such a Buddy Rich fan, what was it like for you when you heard for the very first time his interpretation of something of you?
Well, it's flattering, of course. But you see, I'm not that kind of guy that just is flattered and walks away. I get flattered, and after I feel flattered, I start listening. I'd say, I wouldn't have done that. I would have, the horn section, maybe you should have done this instead. So I'm a little bit, you know, analytical, a little bit geeky when it comes time to those kind of things. People have covered my songs. Most of the times I say, oh, I wish I was there. Would have told you that chord doesn't really work.
Well, you also are a teacher. That's another, in addition to all the other handles that I put on you. What made you want to go down that path of music teacher?
I think it's the same thing. And speaking of Buddha or Christ, even the greatest prophets and the greatest souls that have touched this planet have this penchant for sharing. And so it's a human trait. It's the way life goes on. It's the way the wheel of life keeps spinning. If we wouldn't share, it would stop. I mean, think of it. Everything you've read is someone feeling they want to share.
Right.
If someone didn't want to share, they wouldn't even write about it. How do you get an education? So I took it upon myself to say, no, there's certain things I will share because they cannot be written properly in a book. It's too nuanced. You need to be there with someone in front of a microphone and you look at how they're looking at the microphone. And so the classes that I give, the master classes that I give are very, very detailed master classes. And they're personal. No more than 5 students per class. So they really sometimes I'll give a wider class at a conservatory or a college like I did in Lufkin about a month ago. But the classes I give here in Oregon are personal and small classes.
Well, a student of yours, Jeff Pike, has been recording your work.
Yeah.
And
yes.
I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about the experience of listening to somebody that, is one of your students and here they are recording your work.
It was during COVID and Jeff called me and he said, I would like to record an album of Vannelli songs. Would you be interested in producing it? And of course, COVID, everyone was shut down. And I said, okay, it's a good time. It's real downtime. And besides, I'd like to redo some of these old songs. So come over to Portland and we'll record. And we did it. And I liked the way the album turned out very much so. It got me a chance to rearrange the songs, to rethink them, reimagine them a little bit, and maybe tweak a lyric here and there. Like on Sally, she says the sweetest things, a couple lines here and there. And I think 10, 12 cuts, good solid songs. And he sang them very well and the arrangements turned out very nice too. It was a pleasure working with Jeff.
Something that I don't think a lot of people talk about, but I would be very curious to hear your take on. A lot of times people forget that there is an element when it comes to singing about the physical body. And there have even been some writers who say, hey, when you're writing, it's easy to forget sometimes that the person who's writing this has a physical body. And I'm hoping you can talk about that aspect of being an artist, the fact that you're not physical necessarily like a football player, but there is a physical aspect to what you do.
Oh, definitely. I mean, don't I know it? As the writer, you could be slovenly. You don't have to exercise. You don't have to brush your hair. You don't have to worry about that piece of clothing that, or that, this or the other. But as a performer, you have to get out there and face the spotlight and sell your stuff. And so it's a pressure, but it's a good pressure because it does tend to keep you fit and it does tend to sharpen your blade. And there comes a point in time where you don't feel like sharpening your blade anymore. And I'm not quite there yet. I'm okay with the sharpening. So for me, it's a daily exercise regimen. It's running. It's calisthenics, it's yoga, it's this, it's that. I mean, it's very varied. Doing saunas, doing the whole thing, so that you keep your muscle tone, so that when you get on stage, your legs feel good, your quads are good, your glutes are good, and that your frame, your stomach is good, so that your diaphragm is strong, you can sing, you don't get winded, do a lot of cardio, things like that. And especially as we get older, I mean, it's not a choice anymore. I have to do it.
Has there been a compliment that has meant the most to you through the years?
When maybe the biggest compliment I got was when the bishop from Vatican called me 20 years ago and said that Pope John Paul liked one of my tunes and would like me to sing that tune as Christmas Jubilee. That could have been a highlight of a compliment.
That's big time.
It was. Yeah, and I was very flattered because he was my favorite pope. And the more I studied him and what he accomplished during World War II, and then in the 50s and 60s and 70s with Poland, he was a brave guy and an artist in his own right, playwright, poet. And so I got to speak with him. In fact, the whole family did, and perform for him. And not just willy-nilly. The bishop told me that he got his direct orders from John Paul, said, I would like that artist to be there.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of person, when I interview somebody, I like to listen to the entire catalog. I take it to a real extreme.
Oh, you do? Yes.
And something that occurs to me about your work is, case in point, canto.
Yes.
But then there's stuff that you have that's very, very bluesy. And, and then there's stuff like you've co-written with one of Nashville's big songwriters, Bill LaBounty. There's a lot of different, eclectic, again, is the word that I would use. Could you see it any other way?
No, I was born in a house full of eclectic music. My father loved, Latin bands, big bands, cabaret singers, jazz, Coltrane, Miles, Stan Kenton, Duke Ellington, Sarah Vaughan, Elvis Gerald. That part was really, really taken care of. And then we got into the whole British invasion and admired the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and whatever. And then in elementary school, we went to see the Montreal Symphony rehearse every other Thursday. And one time they were rehearsing Daphne and Chloe by Ravel. And I just fell in love with that sound because I didn't know what that sound was. I said, someday I want to make that kind of music. So a lot of canto really comes from that. Doing canto was, they're very good compositions. It's amazing that this album took about 3 or 4 months to write, the entire album. It went very quick. It was something that had been brewing in me for a long time. And that was really brought on by the Pope, because when my performance was televised from the Vatican, BMG called immediately my agent, my manager, and said they wanted an album of that ilk. And I told them, I have to have creative control. And they said, go ahead, just do it. They gave me a healthy budget and I did it. And that's how canto was born.
What has been the best thing about living this life that you got?
Well, the chance to grow. That's one of the things. And you only have a chance to grow if you throw yourself into the deep end to learn how to swim against the currents, against the cross currents. Very, very, very fortunate that I had this insatiable curiosity, whether it be the religions or the various disciplines, spiritual disciplines that I threw myself into. And not that I thought that it would ever bring heaven on earth. Never imagined that. But I thought that if it could teach me to understand the way things work here, then I could deal with the upheaval, the uproar, deal with all aspects of this planet. So that's part of it. And I was lucky that I found someone like Trisha to love and to be with me during this whole learning process and recording process, because the recording process for me is a learning process. And then you share what you've learned and then you keep growing after that. Like you were saying, some of it's classical, some of it's bluesy. And I always wanted to do a blues album. That's why I did a good thing and more of a good thing. Then another aspect of it is that I got to meet a lot of interesting people that I've been intrigued with and people that taught me things. And I like meeting a little bit less now since COVID, but for the longest while, I love meeting people after concerts. We'd always have conversations. I'd always want to know what they did for a living and why they came and why they like my music. And it was always some education there.
Well, on that note, I would like to make a endorsement, if I could call it that. If anybody has a chance to see a Gino Vannelli concert, I highly recommend it. I have been in the audience at one of your live dates, and everybody can check out GinoV.com. Very easy to remember, GinoV.com. there's a sense that I get about you, Gino, that you're a perfectionist. Is it hard to be a performer when once you've sung it, once you've done that song, it's out there? It's not like a recording. Is that hard, or is that label that I gave you, perfectionist, is that a fair statement?
Well, we try to be perfectionists, but not at the expense of feelings or sentiments or groove or however you want to say it, spontaneity. The concerts are really a combination of structure and spontaneity. I've tweaked, rearranged, or added, as you could probably tell at the concerts, to the songs to make it interesting not only for me, for the band, and for the audience. I always was adamantly against artists who would just perform the records live. You've got to give the audience more than just the record. Now, when the record is brand new, yeah, okay, you can just go and perform the song as it lies on the record. But after all those years, I'm not that kind of artist that had so many, top 10 singles. I suppose, I went to see the Rolling Stones live. My friend mixes them, and I got to see all this stuff go up. And of course, they start rattling off their hits. You expect it to sound more or less like the record, maybe just a bigger version of it. But with my kind of artistry and my kind of career, I attracted a little bit more daring people musically. I dare say a lot of musicians in the audience and people that want to be taken on a journey and not just kind of rattle off songs they know. It's more like I start a song and then I sing, oh, it's that song, and they're always with me. I never get people say, oh, I wish you'd just do it like the record. No, it's just not the kind of audience it is. It's truly an audience that is an expansive audience, and they're looking for more than just a replay of the record.
Very interesting. There is an element of freewheelingness, to use the Bob Dylan-esque word.
Yeah.
But then also in your performance, there's this crooning element, which I didn't expect to be. I mean, it's. I don't want to sound like I'm gushing or anything, but it's a remarkable thing to see a Gino Vannelli concert. I recommend it, folks.
I'm very dedicated to it. I tried. The band is a great band, and to me, I wouldn't do it anymore because I've been performing since I've been 12 years old. I wouldn't do it unless I could do it well and enjoyed doing it. Really enjoyed doing it, and I think I do it as well as I could ever have done it still, and I do enjoy it. Although the travel is getting to be a little bit of a nuisance, but being on stage is worth the headache of travel.
The album, The Life I Got, the most recent album of yours, it closes with one of my favorite songs of yours, Keep On Walking. What was the significance of re-recording that and choosing that as the closing track?
I wrote it 3 months before I met Trisha, and I put it on the Storm at Sunup album. And I really felt like I was walking towards someone that I would meet. It was almost like a prognostication or foreshadowing of what was to happen. And I thought it was appropriate because I recorded 50 years ago, right before I met her. And by the time the album was out, she was gone. And so I had to put it on. And it was inspired by the fact that maybe a year or two before, maybe in 23, I heard the original version on Spotify. And I said to myself, that's a very good song. And I started thinking, I remember now, I wrote that a couple of months before meeting Trisha. I started listening to the lyric. I said, something inside of me knew that something was cooking. I would come across someone that I would spend my life with. And then as the song played, I had my piano next to me and I started, I started playing with the record and I started doing the rip. And I said, that's the way I'm going to do it. And I sort of got inspired. I went to the studio and immediately demoed it and then brought in a few horn players and all that. And it became the record. And it was the first single and we had fun doing it at my friend's house down the road. The video, I should say. But just a solid song and fun to sing. And the new arrangement is fun too. It's kind of is a little Gil Evans-y a bit, old Miles Davis stuff, horn arrangement. And I thought it fit the tune very well.
I love listening to new interpretations of old songs. It's kind of a passion of mine.
Yeah. I have a couple more that I'm going to do from some of the old records.
Oh, yeah? Oh.
Yeah, because I've written a book called The Book of Seven, which is 7 long short stories. They're basically graphic novels or graphic verse novels, and that'll be coming out soon. And there's a couple old songs that I will put on. It's a really expansive project. It's 700 pages of book writing. And as I said, 7 stories. Right now I'm on the last story, the 7th story. And each story will have 2 or 3 songs dedicated to each story. And I hear Ugly Man and Omens of Love that would belong to a couple of the stories. So that's my new passion is writing graphic novels, creating artwork for it too. It's very, very consuming. I wake up every morning at 4:30, and I spend 4 or 5 hours writing every day. And then my other day begins at 9:00.
Well, this is something to look forward to. How intriguing.
It'll be out soon as I finish my 7th story, which will be in a couple of months from now, maybe a little bit more. There's a lot of research to do on this last story. It's really, I have a lot of minutes of a person who spent time in jail to study more of Napoleonic law. That was the law, the civil code in Quebec in the 1960s. It's about this woman who murders her husband, who was an abuser, and how she spent 25 years in prison. And it's a dark story, but it actually has a very, very bright ending to it. So it's been on my mind for many, many years. And of course, there's some telltale sign of the song on the Wilderness Road album, but I decided to write the full story. But it takes a lot of research, like I said, because Napoleonic law is it was a step above what law used to be. I think it was enacted in 1880. But it was still in use in Quebec in the 50s and 60s. And it really limited women's rights. They weren't allowed to, it was illegal for a woman to handle money in the household and things like that, And so it was part of the abuse and part of all that. And it's a very nuanced story because it really truly was something that I experienced. There was the lady who lived upstairs, and she was just a young 20-year-old when it started happening. And she finally stabbed her husband to death. But she was found guilty mainly because of Napoleonic law that would not accept self-defense. But what makes it feel like Napoleonic law was like correct is because she stabbed him 26 times. And once in each eye too. So it just felt like such a heinous crime. They figured that this is malicious intent and you're going to jail. But it didn't make for temporary insanity, for a woman's right to self-defense, and for a woman to simply, try to stop a guy from killing her. So that's why it's very nuanced, and you have to really understand the law very, very well and how lawyers would try to defend it. And at the same time, in the story, her defending lawyer, her defense attorney, can't find it in his heart to totally to all the way defend her because he believes in the Napoleonic law, that she doesn't really have the right to defend herself completely, that she went over the top, and they didn't make any headway or give her any elbow room for temporary insanity or just kind of losing it for the moment. So that's why it's a hard story to write. Right. You have to put yourself in the time and how people looked at it. Because at the bottom of it, a lot of men were afraid to give women equal rights. So they figured if she would win this case, it would be an open door.
I see.
The door would be open for women to commit more crimes. Because in those days, which makes the story even more nuanced, is that I remember hearing the battering going on upstairs almost every night, and it would tell my parents and uncles, and they just would say it's none of our business. In 1959, 1960, people didn't bother about those things. I even went to the cop across the street, and he went to check up, and he said, yeah, she's got a kind of little bruises, but he said, it's nothing really major.
Wow.
It was just the way people thought of it in those times. And of course, by the 70s, things started changing. But in the early 60s, a lot of women it's still happening today. People don't realize that there's still a lot of deaths by battering. And so I think it's a story worth writing about. But like I said, a difficult story because it's not just black and white.
Right. Well, I always like to leave the show at the end up to the guest. It's a totally open-ended question, but for anybody who's tuned in with us, do you have any closing words, an open stage for Gino Vannelli?
You're asking me the question?
Yeah. What would you say to anybody who's tuned in with us?
Well, for musicians who have plans to, to conquer the world with their music, I would say be disciplined. I mean, be a warrior, be a soldier. It's what's going to take. You may get lucky, but the luck won't hold out. You train yourself. And as you almost like a Shaolin monk, you train yourself to work the day, to enjoy yourself, to do all the things you need to do to become a good artist and stick with it. And even when it doesn't happen, you have this discipline that you fall back on, whether it be a physical, a spiritual, whatever it is. And that's part of it. The second part of it is have an open eye, open heart. Consume. Read poetry, read prose, articles, whatever. Notice people, notice their actions, their character, their behaviors, and assimilate it, into your own process. And then practice. Devote a couple hours a day, at least. And then at the same time, know how to let it go. And just let it be an albatross around your neck. It's got to be your dedication and your pleasure. It's got to be your mistress as well as your taskmaster.
Well, Gino Vannelli, thank you so much for spending time with us. It's been a great pleasure.
My pleasure, Paul. Good to meet you.
Good to talk to you. Real quick, do you know the name? I thought this is such a small, I don't know. It's such a coincidence. Do you know the name of one of your students whose name is Paul Leslie Thiard?
Well, maybe. I don't know. I mean, the names kind of escape me, at this point.
Okay.
Why?
Because as I was doing research, as I was digging, I found out that there was a guy who studied with you, and he released an album, and his last name is Thiard, but he released the album as Paul Leslie. And I thought, what a coincidence.
Yeah. I mean, he's kind of throwing me. I don't understand it.
I'm telling you.
Well, that's bizarre. I mean, Thiard is his last name?
Yeah, with an accent on the A.
I haven't a clue.
I just wondered about that.
Yeah, no. There's a lot of stuff happening out there that, I understand even people on Facebook posing as me and answering people as me. And I try not to answer people, on social media, because no matter what you say, it's probably going to be half right and half wrong. So I try not to get involved with that. It's too anonymous, people shoot from the hip way too much.
Well, Gino, thank you again. I appreciate it, and I'll be listening.
All right, man. Take care.
The Paul Leslie Hour is made possible by people like you, listeners, viewers. Please go to thepaulleslie.com/support, and you'll know what to do when you're there. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who contributes. Performance of The Entertainer intro song by John Primorano. And of course, this is your announcer speaking. See you next time on the Paul Leslie Hour.